shooting video, thought that it would be maybe trying to vindicate himself and saying goodbye. He did that, except as we know now that he opened a manila envelope and drew out a pistol, waved people back who were rising, try to, yelling, "Bud, stop, don't," and then shot himself, put the gun in his mouth, and of course he was killed instantly. All of this captured on video and on still pictures, and so television stations and newspapers around the state as well as around the country, but we focused our case study on the stations and newspapers in Pennsylvania and what decisions they made. And only one station continued to use the unedited tape from beginning to end. I think two other stations had used parts of it, but nearly everybody else independently decided to stop it before the shot was fired. And one station out of the 20 in Pennsylvania that Penn State researchers checked at the time did not use any video at all. In newspapers, which is where I was concerned, that we had a variety of stills to work from. The most used, I think, was a picture of him with the pistol in his right hand, left hand waving people back. I call that the stand back picture, and we use that at Inquirer. But we also used a picture of him with the gun in his mouth, and that was on the front page. And inside we showed a picture of him, his body slumped on the floor. This is black and white, so it wasn't gore, and it's taken from a distance. That was not a particularly gory picture. So those are the three we used. There were a few others, but including a moment of impact where his head seems to explode. We never even considered using that. But our photo editors felt strongly that this is essentially a local story and an extraordinary suicide, which generally is not a big news story, that we should use two pictures on the front, the stand back picture and the pistol in the mouth, and inside the body slumped. I do, in retrospect, regret that we used the picture of the gun in the mouth. A lot of people told us the next day that when it's on the front page of the paper, they can't censor this for their children. They probably were offended by the picture too, but most people were speaking about our kids see that and we don't want them to see it. And incidentally, the same sort of reaction came to the station that showed the unexpurgated tape of the effect on children of seeing this. So these were some of the things that we were concerned about. We even though there was a snowstorm at the time and a lot of papers didn't get delivered promptly, we still got 500 phone calls the next day, which was an unusual number. And my opinion is that whether you agree with them or not, that when the switchboard lights up, you need to think about what you did and try to, if you haven't already, try to determine whether maybe that was the right course. A couple of people in our newsroom had expressed concern about the gun in the mouth. But I think our feeling at the time was that this was our state senator, it was in public, it's a local story, it is a major story, and we should use it. But I think that I would certainly not use on the front page and probably wouldn't use that picture at all. I think that the virtue of the stand back picture, you get the feeling of impending violence, but without the actual scene itself. And I think sometimes we ought to spare our readers or viewers of the actual scene if we can suggest it in a way that is not itself offensive. That seemed to be a better course.
What about the Richard Jewell case? I mean, that's one where I think the lesson my students get from this, and I'm not sure it's the correct one, is that we should just not name people as suspects until they've been arrested, because you damage their reputations, and for all you know, as was the case with Richard Jewell? I mean, they're totally innocent of the crime. Could you provide some background on that case and the issues surrounding
Okay, in
it?
1996 at the Summer Olympics, which were in Atlanta, there was a crowd at a party in a park. Richard Jewell was a private security guard stationed at the park. The authorities received a call saying that I think 20 minutes a bomb would go off in that park. Richard Jewell is actually, I understand, on tape helping to move people away from that. He spotted and pointed out a satchel to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation people. The bomb did go off, and one person was killed, and over 100 were injured in one degree or another. A couple of days later, numerous police sources told the police reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that Richard was now a suspect. And the first one who told her said, "You can't use it," but the reporter wisely said, "But if I get it corroborated from other sources, then I'm free to use it, right?" And he said, "Yes." Okay. Well, later on, it was estimated by the FBI that about 500 law enforcement people in Atlanta knew about Richard Jewell being looked at. So it was not surprising that she got 2 or 3 other people confirming it. And so they decided to do a story. And ultimately they did a story 2 days later that said that Jewell, quote, hero guard, quote, is now a suspect. I admire the coverage of the Olympics by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and also the years running up to. They did a tremendous job, but they were under great pressure not to be scooped. And I think that they ran this maybe a day too early, but I don't disagree with their using it before Jewell was charged. He was never charged and ultimately cleared, and a bomber later was confessed to having done it and is now serving a life sentence. So Jewell, but he went through 3 months of hell because people thought that he did it. And of course, even after he was cleared by the FBI that fall, a lot of people still believed he did it. And Jewell, you and I went to a public appearance by Jewell here at Penn State, in which he told in a poignant way that he was sitting with his mother and they're watching Tom Brokaw, and Tom Brokaw is saying that I believe that they have enough on Jewell to arrest him right now, and Richard said his mother turned to him, believe that maybe he did it, and it's made quite an impact on all of us. But to consider whether we should ever run a story about a suspect who is not named, I think it's something you had to be very, very careful about. First thought ought to be you're harming this person if indeed the person is not guilty, as Jewell was not. And second is that and now we get into area of law, is that it could be libelous. So you want to protect yourself, and you certainly ought to protect innocent people. But there are going to be rare occasions where there's a high-profile case and where it is quite evident that someone is a suspect, and that you would only be putting your head in the sand if you said that you pretend that the person has not been identified.
Right, like O.J. Simpson, for example.
Yeah, so the next day, the FBI with a search warrant searches his home, and that's a public spectacle. And I think that you would have a story then, no matter what. The problem with the Jewell story is that you can't read it without assuming that the editor and reporter involved, reporters, plural, involved, thought that Jewell was guilty. And that's something we should not do. The story never says Jewell is not charged. The story never says that police have not produced any physical evidence to link him to the crime. There are innumerable other passages in the story that reveal a bias in saying that the police have now got the right man. They say that Jewell is a former deputy sheriff at such a county in Georgia, where he had bomb training. And I tell my students, well, he probably also had first aid training. Why they don't mention that? Well, the answer is they want to connect the dots. And say these are good journalists, but they, in my view, and I'm from a standpoint of retrospect, I would say they made a number of mistakes in that story. So the problem, in my opinion, was not naming Jewel, perhaps naming the day before they should, but certainly in not being careful to point out the arguments against him being the guy too.